Welcome back, folks, to another episode. Tom and I are going to talk about AdWords, pay-per-click, and search engine optimization today. You know, a lot of times they get intermixed and intermingled, but they're really individual things that we can do to help enhance what we're doing for web marketing. Tom, can you kind of go through AdWords, pay-per-click, and SEO, and kind of go through the differences between those?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's important to realize that both of these things have a very important role in web marketing. And I think that the clients that we work with tend to focus on one or the other, or sometimes focus too much on one or the other and not have a nice balance between the two. And so what I want to do in this podcast is not really talk about how they work, because we've covered that in other podcasts and it's pretty easy to figure that out, but really talk about strategically how to use the two together, what kind of results to expect, and then how do you set up a team, or what kind of team members should be managing this for you? Should you go to external consultants, or should you do this internally? And I think that the most important question, which we talk about in all our podcasts, is what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish from both SEO and AdWords? And most of our clients know the four-step process and realize that step one is strategy. Step two is having a great, well-designed, easy-to-use website. And then this is part of step three, which is traffic generation. So there's a lot of work that gets done before you even get to the point of having an AdWords program. But in a nutshell, this is what you're going to use to drive traffic to your website. And to kind of summarize what's happening with SEO and PPC, I can really do it really quickly. SEO now is much more of a broad nature based on content, and is much more left in the hands of Google. It's really a long-term process now of getting yourself found, and everything's so competitive, and it's hard to get those visitors to your site. So you have to work even harder on a multitude of things, which include content and coding and so forth. So SEO is kind of a long-term involved process, and SEO has to be a shotgun approach. You have to go big and broad with SEO, because for the most part, you're going to find targeted niche terms. And Google's in control of the terms and the people that come to you. Whereas PPC is much more focused, because for one thing, PPC's got a direct cost associated with it. For every click that comes in, you're charged. So PPC has to be much more niche and much more focused. So what we generally recommend to our clients is that pay-per-click, whether it's AdWords or MSN or Bing, is used to supplement what you're doing on SEO. And that really is one of the best strategies you can do with pay-per-click.
So here's the big question that comes up, because obviously you look at SEO and we're looking at more organic, you're looking at long-term. If you combine that with AdWords and PPC, from, let's just take Google, for instance, will your Google rankings go up because you're spending money with Google?
Well, your Google's going to do various things now to charge you by click. And this formula of how Google charges by click is actually very complicated. It's probably one of the most important reasons why almost all companies that are getting into pay-per-click are going to need some kind of outside help, because just the formula itself for figuring out what are we going to be paying per click and how do we compete against our competitors can get very complicated very fast. The way I think it can be easily simplified is to say to your target market, what is a key term that you really feel you need to be found for? And in fact, you might have a dozen of these key terms that you really need to be found for, that you're not being found on organic. Once you figure that out, then you want to go backwards and figure out, well, if we start to spend money on these terms, what kind of return are we going to see from direct conversions and sales? Or what kind of branding push are we going to see if we do this? Because branding is another component of PPC, which basically means, you know, if my name is out there in front of people, what kind of return am I going to see? And you can also do things in your ads, like put a phone number in your ad. So people may not click directly on that ad. They may click your phone number or a dedicated phone number from Google. And then that creates a whole nother way of tracking return and tracking what is the value of a click.
Now, talking about value of a click, how much retargeting is happening now? Because I know for those aren't familiar with retargeting, it's like you might go visit a website, or you do a Google search, let's say acoustical foam, and the next thing you see is you start seeing Automute or one of these other dealers for for acoustical foam start showing up in everything that you go. You go visit another website like CNN to go get the news, and on the sidebar over here, it says acoustical foam. And it's like, well, wait, I'm not on an acoustical website. I'm getting some news. What's going on with
That's right.
retargeting, and how can retargeting enhance what somebody's already doing with PPC?
Well, retargeting is actually a very interesting way of marketing on the web. And you're right, it's a way of following people around through various websites that have, these websites have relationships with Google AdWords. So they know that you have an account with Google AdWords, and they're going to display ads on their website in a similar fashion to how Google displays ads in their search engine. The thing about retargeting is that it's become a necessary evil for online retailers. They basically have to include it in their budget, and they have to do this, but it has much lower returns and click-through rates than direct AdWords and direct niches. Most of the clients that we work with could not afford something like retargeting because they don't have the advertising budget in general to draw those kind of eyeballs to their website. But the larger e-commerce retailers, and in fact, any kind of niche retailer, like you mentioned with the acoustical foam, they have to do retargeting because this is their livelihood now. 15 years ago, they might have been running ads in newspapers or magazines, right, to niche markets. But now those ads have become retargeting. And retargeting, because it has lower conversion rates, it means you have to be smart about how you do this. And once again, you probably need an outside consultant to help set this up. Or if you're going to get into retargeting, my advice is to have a relationship with Google and call a Google rep and have them walk you through this. And I really push our clients to push Google. So if you have a Google rep who's helping you set up retargeting in AdWords, push them for a return, because this is all measurable. So if you're running retargeting, you're spending thousands of dollars a month, and you're saying, hey, we're not seeing a return here. Call Google and say, what do we need to do to get a return? Google's a great resource at this because they know what it takes to get a return. Right. They've seen it with tens of thousands of other clients, and they can walk you through that. And I would hope that the Google rep would be honest enough with you to say, probably not going to see a return there. Probably not an area you want to focus in. Maybe let's divert our efforts into other areas. So it's a huge advantage of AdWords is to have that Google rep that you can call. And we'll leave the phone number for Google on this blog post as well. And they'll help you with retargeting. They'll help you with all aspects of AdWords. But Google will not help you with SEO. They'll send you to tutorials or pretty much generic content saying, this is how SEO works. But what SEO has become over time now, as I mentioned, is this ongoing process of content generation, and a quality website with quality content and usability for both mobile and desktop.
Right. Now, is there a way, I just want to touch one last thing on retargeting. Is there a way to make it useful for a smaller online presence, or somebody who doesn't have the big budget as an online retailer, to get very, very niche specific for retargeting, and maybe even including that at the same time, utilizing Facebook or utilizing a social media, depending on if that's where your market is, to be able to target specifically there? Because I also understand that some of their algorithms on Facebook can be targeted so niche. There was some marketing guys. I was hearing a story about guys playing pranks on each other, and there was a gentleman who played video games a lot and always had problems with his beard. And so they targeted him specifically, and they did a target so the ads would show up to this guy. Specifically, are you a gamer that has problems with his beard? And so these ads kept showing up for him. And he's like, I think somebody's stalking me because all these ads are coming up, but they're talking about me. And it was a joke. After a while, they taunted this guy for about a month, but I think they only spent $100 in targeting because it was so niche. It was only to this one guy. But you can get, I think there's some ways that all of our viewers and listeners can get some more mileage out of this, depending on where their target market is.
It's a great point. And then you bring up really what is the bottom line of this podcast, is that SEO is big, comprehensive, and you throw out a big net to drive people and to capture people. Now, even though all of those searches could be niche searches, you're throwing out a really big net and attracting those folks to you. PPC should be totally focused and totally niche, because for every click that you get, you're going to pay for that click. So you want the click to have an intention of purchasing. And PPC also involves landing pages, it involves ads, it involves keywords and a lot of things. But it's very easy to get traffic from PPC. It's also easy to get conversions, but unless you have a niche and targeted program, like you mentioned, something that is so obvious it's a great match and fit, you're not going to see the results. We're working with a client right now that's spending 6 figures a year in PPC, getting traffic, getting conversions, getting inquiries, but the net that they're throwing out is so big that most of the inquiries that come in are really just looking for information. They're not qualified. They're not really ready to move forward. So that program has to be revamped because it's not producing the end result. It's helping them with their brand, but the SEO is doing that too. You know, if you do a brand search, they're found. So the key thing I think I want to leave you with, as far as what you just said, is very important, is that use PPC for niche, even by local or regional searches, and you use SEO as a broad approach. Now, I will say one more thing about PPC and Google. Google wants to make money on AdWords. So if you start a campaign and you use the term, you know, acoustical pads or whatever they might be, you're going to get searches for anything to do with acoustical products, because Google throws out a huge net unless you very much target your keywords. And you do that when you set up your PPC campaigns.
So, Tom, what are some action items that our viewers and listeners can kind of start on this path of revamping their SEO and PPC programs?
Well, I think for PPC, if you're going to go down that route, make the decision if you have the skill set internally or can get trained, or if you have to go to an outside consultant. And then once you do set up your PPC campaigns, make sure you have a process for looking at them weekly. Also, make sure that your PPC campaigns are being tracked in Google Analytics as well. For SEO, one of the most important things you can do is set up webmaster tools, which we've talked about in these podcasts. That's the #1 way to track SEO effectiveness. In both your Google Analytics and in your AdWords campaigns, make sure you set up conversion tracking that makes sense, logical conversion tracking that ties into the end result, not just to generate activity or generate leads, but that can also generate sales. And then once again, I really encourage you that if you're going to go down this path, bring your team together for at least a weekly meeting, look at the spend, look at the data, look at the results, and then realize that this is not something that you start and then leave to itself. This is something that needs constant nurturing on a weekly basis, or you can end up spending a lot of money and not seeing the return.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate it. And folks, thanks for joining us again. And be sure to tune in to all of our former podcasts that we've done and check those out. If you've got anything that you want Tom and I to discuss or take a look at, feel free to shoot us an email at info@intuitivewebsites.com. Thank you so much for joining us.